it's not uncommon for things to get a little worse initially. You would think, oh my God, it's already bad enough, and now that we're going to work on some things, it's going to get worse. Don't be surprised. In fact, I might be so bold as to say it would be likely, because she has kind of learned how to deal with you guys. I'm not saying it was functional, but she certainly has learned how to deal with you, and you have learned to deal with her. I'm not saying it was necessarily a healthy way to deal with her, but you have established some kind of a habit, probably a very dysfunctional habit. And now you're going to shift gears. So that's really going to upset the apple cart. If you've been used to driving around in your car on 3 wheels, and 1 wheel is just driving on the brake drum, you have learned how to adjust that car and kind of get by. And now you're going to put the wheel back on it again. It's going to take a little while before you realize, okay, well, now I got to go back to driving, normal like type thing. So I hope that made some sense. Anyway, don't be discouraged if you have setbacks. In fact, I would go so far as to say, when you have these setbacks, and you said you've had a few that really almost, was quite a bump in the road, those are perfect opportunities to practice. You can't come to group and go, okay, well, we have these recommendations, so now we're going to try this and it's going to go perfectly. Of course, that's not going to happen. You know that. But what you may not be thinking of is, okay, well, when we do hit a real nasty bump, instead of going, oh, and beating up on ourselves, I thought we had this down, we were doing so much better for so long, we feel like we're back to square one. Instead of all that shit, you're going to stop, hey, okay, great. We're still practicing. This is a great opportunity to use this as a learning opportunity. If you wanted to learn how to golf and you never golfed before, and then you went out to the golf course and you were terrible at it, but you kept practicing, and then you got really good, and you thought, I think I have this thing down. And then one day, you thinking you've got it all down, go and have a terrible game, balls all over the place. You're like, I feel like I'm starting over. So you have some bad times, and you learn from those opportunities. They're not setbacks, they're setups for a practice. With emotions blindness, sometimes it's hard for these guys to empathize. It's not that they don't want to empathize, and it's not that they don't have empathy. They rarely have displayed empathy, but so let's make that distinction. So with emotions blindness, it's really hard to empathize. You get a pass on that to a degree from me. Maybe not from her, but let's make the distinction between, at least in my opinion, between empathy and compassion. Empathy is, I understand exactly how you're feeling. That's going to be a hard one for you. Compassion is, I may not know necessarily how you are feeling or why you're feeling that way, but you're important to me, and I want to do whatever I can do to reduce your suffering. That's the difference between empathy and compassion. You may have a hard time empathizing, but you will not have a hard time unless you just choose not to really care. You won't have a hard time with compassion, which again is, I'm not sure why you're distraught, and even when you tell me why you're distraught, it doesn't seem to quite make logical sense to me. But if you say you're distraught, and I care about this marriage, and I'm going to employ compassion, which is, what can I do to reduce your suffering? So you don't get a pass on that one at all. You can be in the business of being compassionate without necessarily being full tilt, pedal to the metal in the business of empathy. But you didn't sign up for autism. It was imposed upon you by the universe. It's not your fault that you have it. You're wired differently. It causes a lot of fucking problems in a person's life when they have it. That doesn't give you an excuse to just go, okay, well, I just have it, and so now she's just going to have to deal. It's just one of these traits, and you're just going to have to learn to live with it. That's not what I'm saying. You are responsible for your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. But you did not precipitate this autism. You were one of the lucky ones that just happened to get it. So it's not your fault that you have it. And it's not your fault that you have this anxiety that makes you engage in all of these ridiculous anxiety reduction strategies that cause a problem in your relationship. You need to give yourself some self-compassion. Compassion is, tell me what I need to do that's within my power to do to reduce your suffering. Sign me up. I'm all in. Self-compassion now is you're going to turn that around and put it on you. So when you're feeling down, you're going to try to approach your feelings with curiosity and openness rather than chastising yourself for feeling a particular way. You're going to be more tolerant of your own flaws, if we want to call it a flaw, deficit, challenge, whatever term you want to use. You're going to try to be understanding and patient towards the certain traits of the disorder that you don't like. There's some traits that you have and they ain't going anywhere. So you're going to try to be understanding of the fact that these are the traits that came with the thing I have, and I'm going to be, more understanding and patient with myself when I exhibit those traits. You're going to be kind to yourself when you're experiencing suffering. And you also need to fully recognize, Rick, that this is a huge part of the human condition. There's not just a few dozen people that have Asperger's syndrome. We're talking millions and millions and millions. And we're only talking this within this generation. If we wanted to go back to Rex's dad and Rex's dad's dad, we could go back 4 or 5 generations and we would be talking perhaps billions of people who have had autism and never knew it. So the other thing is you got to remember that you're not the only one that has this. This is more common than we know, because some people don't want to get a diagnosis, and some people don't even know that they are on the autism spectrum, so wouldn't even think about a diagnosis. So during when you are tempted, as you will be, to beat up on yourself, you're going to treat yourself with the same kindness and respect that you would with a cherished friend somewhere. I'm sure you have a friend, maybe it's your wife or somebody, where you wouldn't treat them the same way you treat you, would you? And then the other thing you need to remember is you're not alone. There's many others going through the same thing. I had a conversation with somebody, and you guys that were here will remember she said that she's not in love with me anymore, but she still loves me. I'm not recommending anything, but I am saying that if that happened to me, I would have a problem with it, but I wouldn't try to change her mind about it. I would have a problem with it, and what I would do with my problem, and would take ownership of that problem, I would move on, because I would be the type of person that would want to be in love with somebody and would want that somebody to be in love with me. Falling in love and falling out of love is not a choice or a decision. It just happens organically. It's like falling asleep. You don't lay down and think, okay, well, I'm going to make the decision to fall asleep right now. No, it sneaks up on you and sleep takes over when you're not even consciously aware of it. So I can't blame any NTYs who fall out of love. I can't blame them. There's no way to control that. If falling out of love is not a big deal to you, in other words, you're perfectly okay with just being a roommate or just cohabitating, or have kind of like a brother-sister relationship, then I guess it doesn't matter whether she's in love with you or not. That's not me. Now, on a related note, and I'm not accusing of any NTYs in here doing this, so those that might be watching, don't take this personally. But in many cases, statements coming from NTYs are nothing short of emotional abuse, but due to mind blindness issues, alexithymia issues, executive function issues, and a few other things, doesn't even know that he's being abused. I've lost track of the number of men that I've worked with that have described abuse from her, but he didn't even call it abuse. He didn't even know that it would be qualified as legitimate abuse. But if he's being honest with me, which I'm sure he is. That's his truth. I don't think he's making things up just to get sympathy. Some men describe behavior from their NT wife that is nothing short of emotional abuse. And she accuses you of being emotionally abusive. A lot of NT wives complain that you don't have any empathy and have complained bitterly about your supposed lack of emotional reciprocity, but have had no empathy for you either. So I just want to make it very clear that this is a two-way street more than some ENTs are willing to admit. It is a developmental disorder, which simply means that developmentally, the social and emotional part of the brain is underdeveloped. You could think of it as a deficit in emotional literacy and social skills, with one huge caveat. Pay attention. A deficit in emotional literacy and social skills, but almost exclusively when he's trying to relate to his significant other. With his coworkers, and they're talking about perhaps his work is his special interest, he's talking to his coworkers. They don't know if he has ASD or not. The neighbors, they won't know. His friends that he bowls with or golfs with, they would have no clue. Why would you be the one to have the clue? Because his social and emotional weaknesses reveal themselves when he's in a situation where he has to be firing on all 8 cylinders, but he doesn't have 8 cylinders. I'm not saying he doesn't have any empathy or doesn't know anything about emotions or doesn't have any social skills. No, he does, but he's at his weakest with you. And if that's not the truth, neither one of you would be here. The whole point of doing this little backdrop is nobody did anything wrong. She, the NT wife, is wired to be connective, bonding, nurturing, emotional, etc. The guy on the autism spectrum is almost wired 180 degrees opposite of that. He's task-oriented. He's low in social and emotional needs. He's highly logical. So that's why we have this issue. So it would be great unless the resentment is so deep that you just can't bring yourself to doing it, in which case I'm not going to be judgmental. It would be best for the neurodiverse couple to extend one another a little grace and mercy given the dynamics at play.
Not sure if your self-talk is positive or negative? Here are some common forms of negative self-talk. Catastrophizing. You automatically anticipate the worst. For example, the drive-through coffee shop gets your order wrong, and you automatically think that the rest of your day will be a disaster. Filtering. You magnify the negative aspects of a situation and filter out all the positive ones. For example, say you had a great day at work, you completed tasks ahead of time and were complimented for doing a speedy and thorough job, but you forgot one minor step, and so that evening you focus only on your oversight and forget about the compliments you received. Personalizing. When something bad occurs, you automatically blame yourself. For example, you hear that an evening out with friends is canceled, and you assume that the change in plans is because no one wanted to be around you. Polarizing. You see things only as either good or bad, right or wrong, black or white. There is no middle ground. You feel that you have to be perfect or that you're a total failure. If you tend to have a negative outlook, don't expect to become an optimist overnight, but with practice, eventually your self-talk will contain less self-criticism and more self-acceptance. You may also become less critical of the world around you. So now we want to look at why an individual isolated problem that could occur later this afternoon may feel so much worse than it actually is. So when there is a relationship problem, we'll just say there's an argument over something that's important to one or perhaps both parties, and there is a heated exchange. Hurtful things are said and done, and it's in some cases just a brutal blowout. In retrospect, when you look back on that argument or that event, there's two memories. There's the content memory and the emotional memory. The content memory is what was said, and the emotional memory is how you felt during that argument. So when you're reflecting on that argument, maybe a week later or even a month later, you have content memory and emotional memory. So every time you remember that fight, we will say, this verbal fight, you also feel the same negative emotions that you felt during that episode. And if you revisit the memory of that argument 2, 3, 4, 12 times, each time you're going to feel just as bad as you did in the moment. And so even though the event only happened once, it feels as though it's happened 12 times because you replayed that video in your head of the event, and each time you play it, each time you remember it, you feel it. And the other reason that a current isolated problem can feel so much worse than it actually is due to this cumulative effect of unresolved problems. If you're like most couples that I work with, you stop talking about problems because your conflict resolution skills as a couple sucked. Not only did you not get the problem solved, you just irritated and frustrated one another even worse than you were before you came into the discussion. So there's this pile of problems that just goes in the closet, and that pile is getting really tall. And so then a problem comes up that, let's say, is a level 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very severe. So relative to some of the other problems, a level 3 problem is not a big deal. But when you throw it on top of an existing pile of problems, now you have the straw that can break the camel's back. So this is why it's imperative to come up with a communication strategy that you can use that doesn't end in a disaster, because you're going to remember the disaster. And each time you recall it, it's going to make it feel worse. And each time you have a problem that goes unresolved, if you guys don't talk about a problem, you don't forget about the problem. It just goes in the filing cabinet called unresolved problems. And when that list gets too long, both parties lose their confidence in their ability to problem solve, which even furthers the likelihood that they won't even attempt it. And now we're in trouble because you have a couple, both of which feel like they're always walking on thin ice. So in summary, the reason that a rather mild problem could feel like a super bad problem is due to the emotional memory factor and the cumulative effect of unresolved problems factor. I'm married to a man with Asperger's syndrome, and I'm wondering why he has these childish tantrums, meltdowns, shutdowns, and yelling matches. Well, most people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism have emotional and behavioral problems, quite honestly, to one degree or another. And these challenges are most often related to social skills deficits associated with the disorder. Social difficulties frequently involve feelings of anxiety, loss of control, and the inability to predict outcomes. So as a result, these individuals usually have problems connected to their inability to function in a world that they see as threatening and unpredictable. The individual who feels generally fearful or anxious or confused will typically act out these troubling emotions in rather destructive ways. And as you say, in the form of tantrums, meltdowns, shutdowns, and even aggression at times. And so it's not uncommon for, in this case, the neurotypical wife to view the individual with Asperger's as mean-spirited, malicious, selfish, uncaring, and so on. When your husband with Asperger's syndrome experiences emotional issues, behavioral difficulties, whatever you want to call it, his problems are most often associated with his defensive panic reaction, social incompetence, sensory sensitivities, or an obsessive interest in a particular topic. Because people with Asperger's tend to be cut off from their feelings, they obtain facts and information without understanding how those facts can be applied to real-life situations. Also, due to being detail-oriented, they often miss the overall picture and apply the same level of detail to every situation, whether appropriate or not. And you may have run into a situation where people outside of the home view your Asperger's husband as just a normal person with no apparent behavioral or emotional issues. They may perceive him as having both fewer and less significant deficits than you do. This disparity is often due to the fact that the person with Asperger's or high-functioning autism appears, and there's the key term, he appears to perform as well as neurotypical individuals, with the exception of social competency and with the exception of emotional reciprocity with his significant other. Other areas that individuals with Asperger's syndrome experience difficulty would be concrete and literal thinking styles, difficulty in discerning relevant from irrelevant stimuli, inflexibility, difficulties in the areas of problem solving and language-based critical thinking, obsessive and narrowly defined interests, weakness in comprehending verbally presented information, poor organization skills, difficulties in arriving at logical solutions to routine and real-life problems, and problems in applying skills and knowledge to solve problems. It is very common for people in a relationship with somebody with Asperger's syndrome to fail to recognize their special needs because they often give the impression that they understand more than they do. And furthermore, certain strengths of the disorder may actually mask the deficits. Now, I know at some level, everything that I just laid out here may sound like a litany of excuses as to why your Asperger's husband behaves the way that he does. But I've been very cautious in this presentation to only include those things that may appear childish. In other words, these traits that I've listed throughout this video do indeed, on occasion, give the impression that the individual is acting very immaturely, which shouldn't be surprising because Asperger's is a developmental disorder. In other words, developmentally, they are socially and emotionally lagging compared to their chronological age. So in that sense, some of this behavior can be said to be somewhat childish. You, as a female neurotypical, your brain is highly social. Your emotional intelligence is super high. And unfortunately, the individual with Asperger's syndrome is on the other end of that spectrum. But that's not to say they're not intelligent. In fact, most people with Asperger's are much smarter and logical than the average neurotypical. Hey, this is Mark Hutten. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendly link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.